The rain was soft that night. Not a storm. Not even a hard shower. Just a steady sheet of sound against the window. The sort that people play on loop when they need sleep. I wasn't trying to sleep though. I was trying to fill silence. It was late. I had headphones on, scrolling through videos. I picked one at random. Rain sounds for sleep. 10 hours long. Nothing unusual. A dozen comments about how peaceful it was, how perfect for drifting off. I let it play while I wrote notes, the gentle hiss washing over me. At first, I thought it was in my head. The faint dip inside the static. A wobble. Like when dial-up used to strain through bad wiring. Only sharper. It came once, then was gone. I almost ignored it. But I've trained my ears on noise before. I know when tone shifts. This wasn't rain. I dragged the progress bar back 30 seconds. Listened harder. The hiss went on, even and soft, until the point hit. Then I heard it again. A hole in the wash. A voice like rasp, buried so low you'd miss it unless you strained. Not language, but shape. Breathing through wires. The hair on my arms lifted. I stopped the playback. Sat still. The room hummed with my laptop fan. My own pulse was louder than the speakers. I exhaled, laughed quietly at myself, hit play again. Still rain. Nothing odd. I leaned back into my chair. At the 10-minute mark, it returned. Louder this time. Static bending, syllables straining to form. I slammed pause before I realized what I'd done. My cursor hovered. The timer line on the player seemed to stutter, shaking by a half second. A tiny jump back and forth. It shouldn't do that. I copied the file locally. I wanted to see if it came through on a clean pull, without buffering. By then, I wasn't tired anymore. My room felt too wide. I unplugged the speakers, pulled my old handheld recorder from the desk drawer, and set it against the laptop grill. I hit record and played the whole segment fresh. The taped rain sounded the same. But when I rewound to listen, the shape was clearer. The first time I heard it, my scalp went cold. The static wasn't aimless. It repeated. 3 warped phrases, clipped and broken, almost rhythmic. A rise, a break, then a flattening that suggested coordinates, numbers, some set of instructions. But not in any full tongue. A pattern, but fractured, like someone whispering through cloth. I replayed the recording twice, 3 times, until I knew the shape well enough to wait for it. Each repetition was nearly identical, but never fully the same. Slight bends, slight shifts. A pattern adjusting to me as I strained toward it. Rain throbbed steady beneath it, ordinary, safe, hiding the intrusion. Part of me wanted to discard it. Format the drive. Walk out for air. Say nothing. But I've done too much work in archives to ignore anomalies. My life lately was already full of silence I tried to drown under noise. I had lost too much. The empty hours at night stretched wide. Something in me chose instead to listen closer. At 2:29 a.m., the hum pulled harder than before. For a second, the file waveform on my recorder bloomed with a spike, well above the level of rainfall. The tape actually clipped. When I slowed playback to half speed, I swore I heard a word. Don't. Just that. A hiss carried sharp enough it wasn't natural. I stopped breathing through most of it. My body forgot how to inhale. My chest grew tight. I shook my head to clear it. Then I leaned forward again, volume all the way up. If I let silence win, it'd be gone. To prove it was real, I captured a second segment, 30 minutes later, on the same rain loop. A different voice like bend appeared. Softer, but there. As if waiting. That told me this wasn't chance. Not an artifact. Not broken audio encoding. Something deliberate was buried in sleep tracks people trusted to calm them. People across the world might be streaming the same cut, letting it whisper below their awareness. Many of them asleep, never knowing. But there I was, awake, hearing. I sat with my back flat to the chair, recorder still rolling. My hand shook holding it near my mouth. "This is the first night," I said, my words dry, almost broken. "And I know I'm not imagining it. The signal is there. It hides in the hiss. Anyone could hear it, if they knew to listen." I turned my head toward the dark window. Rain licked the glass soft. My throat tightened as if someone else was in the room. My voice fell low, a confession meant to mark the moment. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. The next night I pulled up the same file. I told myself it was only for a quick check. But the truth was, I couldn't let it go. Something had wedged itself inside my chest, the need to be certain. I played the loop with my recorder ready, pen and paper beside me. Rain filled the headphones again. Smooth, steady, almost comforting. Until the seconds slipped wrong. When I looked down at the screen, the timer made no sense. It said 1 hour 14 minutes, but I had only been listening for maybe half an hour. I stopped the track. The file stats showed a different length each time I refreshed. Once it was 9 hours, then 8, then suddenly 12 hours in a few seconds. Digital counters don't drift like that. Not without help. I copied the file to a backup drive. Checked playback on a second player. Same drift. Even stranger, the internal clock of my laptop jumped backward 3 minutes. I stared at it, stunned, and wrote the time down. I wanted proof for later, when memory blurs and doubts crawl in. I tried again with my recorder. I let it capture 10 minutes of rain. When I played it back, I heard something I never wanted. A faint hum. Not inside the laptop now. Inside the recorder, my own device. I shook it, tapped the mic. The hum grew sharper, as if mocking me. It had followed. Late in the night I pulled the headphones away to steady my breath. And there it was. Faint but present. A low vibration bleeding through the air, even though nothing was connected. The headphones weren't even plugged in. Yet they carried the trace of the hum, curled so close it felt inside my ear. My hand went cold. I spoke aloud to prove I was awake. "It's real." My voice tasted wrong, thin against the thick sound building around me. I could picture how it would feel, listened to through someone else's speaker. Something creeping toward you while your guard's down. When I slowed the recording, the distortion shaped itself again. Not words, not fully, but too patterned for noise. Like coordinates floating just beyond reach. A logic that refused to stay translated. My recorder caught sudden dead air, dead quiet, followed by a single burst that ripped across the spectrum. The spike rattled my small speakers. A near explosion in miniature dot. It left me shaking, hands white against the desk. There was no excuse, no compression artifact. It repeated with slight changes each time I traced it. Something was in the rain tracks, pressing through. Something generating by design. I clicked open my log, wrote it down carefully. Timestamp unknown. Duration unstable. Hum persistent. Recording independent. Then I stopped, pen stalled above the paper, because I realized the fear wasn't that I'd lose the record. The fear was that the signal already knew I was listening. I lifted the mic once more, my whisper nearly gone. "It is not weather. It knows when I am listening." I opened the file again the next morning, still half exhausted from listening all night. The first thing I checked was the metadata. I know how to read it: date created, modified, duration, codec. Things always line up, even if the sound itself doesn't. But this one didn't. The created date showed 2 hours before I'd even started recording. The modified tag was later than the night itself. And the duration shifted every time I refreshed. Sometimes it was 8 hours. Sometimes 10. Sometimes it dropped under 7. An audio file should not rewrite its own metadata. Yet here it was, mutating in plain text. I closed it, reopened it in another player. Same drift. My secondary device showed 10 minutes longer than the first. I burned it to a disk, curious if the physical copy would lock the timing. Played it back different again. Each player was a different story. Each one telling me the same thing. The file refused to stay fixed. By evening, I was so wound tight I stopped trusting my laptop clock. I set a wristwatch face up on the desk, next to the recorder. The seconds ticked steady, but on screen the counter pulled away, like something lagging half a step behind. Watching the gap widen felt like standing with one foot in two separate rooms. I wrote it down, hoping the act of writing could tether me to what was real. But late that night the hum returned. I wasn't even wearing headphones when it slipped in. A faint tremor in the room, too low to call a sound, but present enough to feel. I stared at the headset lying across the desk, cable unplugged, jack empty. Yet a pulse leaked out. A ghost vibration meant only for me. I lifted it with shaking hands and pressed one muff against my ear. The hum was there. Low, like a slow engine shaking awake. I pulled it away fast, and the sound ceased. My whole arm felt electric, tingling up to the shoulder. I grabbed my handheld recorder. Clicked it on. My own voice hitched as I tried to speak steady. Entry number 2. Timestamp irregular. Duration unstable. My breath quivered against plastic. Signal present, now external. When I paused, the recorder caught silence. 10 seconds of nothing. Then, sudden swell dead air taking shape. A subterranean hum rolled right up against the diaphragm. The spike nearly flattened the tape, like pressure released straight into the microphone. Later, playing it back, I realized how intimate it sounded. Not sound traveling through space, but something slipping directly into the listener's ear, bypassing distance altogether, as if it wanted no air between. That was when I understood it wasn't an artifact. Not rain misread. It touched devices differently depending on who listened. My logs could map proof, but the experience was always pointed and directed. It was intrusion. I leaned close to the recorder in the dark. I spoke low, almost ashamed. It is not weather. It knows when I am listening. I needed someone who knew more than I did. I couldn't explain the drifting timestamps or the hum bleeding into unplugged headphones. So I called an engineer I trusted. Not a close friend. More like someone who owed me a favor. I emailed a short message. No details, just, I need analysis. Waveform attached. We met 3 nights later in a small studio downtown. I carried the recorder in a padded case, hands sweating the whole way. The air inside the building smelled faintly of ozone and stale coffee. His desk was stacked with monitors, balanced speakers, racks of dust-dark hardware. I handed him the file like it was evidence. He loaded the track, pulled it up against spectral software, color bands rushing across the screen. To me, it looked random, but he frowned almost immediately. "This isn't noise," he said quietly. He pointed to a faint vertical pattern buried under the rain. Pulses rising every few seconds, stubborn and neat. "That's structure." I swallowed hard. I expected him to laugh it off, say it was compression. But instead he zoomed closer. The pulses stood out like red bars against a blue wash. Too defined to be chance. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. His tone sharpened. "Public upload," I said too fast. "Relaxation video." His eyes narrowed. He shifted in his chair. "You should stop digging." But I couldn't stop. I asked him to overlay it against weather radar, just in case. He hesitated, then loaded old data into the program. The pulses didn't match rainfall. Instead, they aligned with bursts seen across multiple bands. He shook his head. "These are across channels. Different hosts." Same signature. My throat tightened as I realized what that meant. It wasn't just one file. Not just one accidental pattern. It was everywhere. Ocean sounds. White noise, rainfall, ordinary tracks people stream to fall asleep. Why would someone bury code in tracks like this? I asked in a whisper. Not code, he said. A carrier. A signal looking for vessels. The words made me dizzy. Carrier, vessel, more than noise. More than harmless static. My mind raced through nights alone, millions listening worldwide, letting these signals seep in with eyes closed. If signals become doors, this one was learning how to step through sleep. He leaned forward. I don't want to see the rest. Delete it. I stared at the screen, at the repeating spike climbing steady on the waves. The rain didn't matter. The file itself carried an agenda. That was when all the monitors in the room twitched at once. Color bands fractured. Static burst so loud the speakers shook loose dust from the vents. My heart slammed. He cursed, yanked the headphones from his ears. But I kept watching the bands bloom, streaking upward like the spectrum itself was splitting dot. It lasted only a second. Then silence. Only rain on replay, soft and unchanged. He pushed back from the console. His voice was calm but sharp. I'm serious. Drop it. This isn't. I can't, I said. My chest hurt saying it. If it spreads through signals, then it spreads through us. He didn't answer. The silence between us was heavier than static. I packed up the recorder, hands trembling as I walked out. I caught my reflection in the studio glass. Pale, wired, breathing uneven. I thought about the patterns repeating on his screen, every pulse a reminder. Memory fading with time, but recordings holding. That night, back home in the dark, I pressed record on my own device again. Voice shaking, I spoke into the mic, leaving a log. Entry 3. Carrier confirmed. Widespread. Uploaded under ordinary masks. The hum answered almost immediately. Gentle, insistent, curling shallow against me. It didn't feel like discovery anymore. It felt like acknowledgement. Now I know I can't turn back. I started digging through old forums, the ones where people traded relaxation files years ago. Dead boards with ugly fonts, forgotten avatars, threads that hadn't been touched in a decade. Most of it was idle chat about favorite channels, but every so often a post slipped through where someone said the rain changed their dreams. The phrasing was almost identical, no matter the user. They would wake to headaches, nosebleeds, and all of them mentioned the same fragment. A single word pulled, straight out of static. It wasn't written like a metaphor. They described it as if something was waiting behind the word. A few even typed it as if relaying a sound instead of spelling. Door. Formats shifted, but the intent was there. Reading those posts made my fingers cold. I knew what I'd heard. I wasn't alone. I searched deeper. Old file sharing archives, downloads hidden behind expired links. Some of the files were broken. Others refused to play. One stuck out. A rain loop from 2009, listed as 10 hours. When I dragged to the half point, there was silence that should not have been there. 4 seconds of total absence. Rain sliced clean away. The cavity felt wrong, like stepping into a room with no furniture. I played it again. 4 seconds blank. Then on the 5th beat, a bloom. A compressed wash of noise that flared across the spectrum. Jagged verticals streaked the waveform, each one aligned like steps rising into darkness. It wasn't static. It was structured. Buried under that bloom, a voice shaped by whispers pressing on glass. I slowed it down to half speed. The fragments bled through clearer. Not sentences. They didn't even sound like words. They were samples, slipped fragments of human breath replayed until they mimicked a new language. I could almost make out enter, then softer phrases that made my skin crawl. each repetition deeper than the one before, like the file wanted to be excavated, not listened to. I wrote a note in pen, not on any device. Hidden audio. Positioned after 4-second silence. Blue Max's key. I didn't want to risk digital logs this time. Too much of what I'd collected already moved on its own. When I checked those forum threads again, something worse appeared. Users had described strange experiences, then stopped posting. Entire accounts disappeared, leaving dead blanks where their conversations had been. No redirect. No ban notice. Just gone, as if erased. One thread ended mid-sentence. A final post read. It's under, and nothing after. Forum locked. Archive version cached once, but now scrubbed. No trace of the user's name. I stared at that blank screen until the clock read 4 in the morning. The blue glow felt like static against my face. I pressed record, needing my own voice to anchor me. I whispered, "They're gone." Their words deleted. Everyone who documented the door. Their silence is the warning. My throat closed on the sentence. The hum oozed faintly around me, rising like breath. I sat in that thin air, pen resting near my hand, and the thought came sharp. If they are being erased, will I be next? I replayed the recordings again, this time not at normal speed, but reversed. I wasn't expecting much. A hobbyist's trick. But I had to try. The rain hissed backward like waves rolling uphill. At first it was nonsense. Then threads of sound slid into place. Syllables lined up, not human, but too deliberate for chance. I leaned forward, heart cracking against my ribs. I scribbled on paper as fast as I could catch fragments. What I heard were not random noises. They were coordinates. A grid of numbers buried inside sleep audio dot, and every reversal, the sequence repeated almost exactly. Not perfect, but close enough that my pen scrawls matched in 3 trials. I traced them onto a map. The lines crossed in the middle of nowhere. A field station, officially decommissioned 20 years ago. Cold Hill Weather Outpost. I knew its name because I recognized the region. I'd driven through once when I was younger. My sibling had sat beside me, counting power line poles for fun. That memory opened a wound in me, and the coordinates folded sharp against it. What if recordings held more truth than memories ever could? By midnight I knew I had to go. Every mark I wrote bloomed to the same point, the same place. The tape was trying to lead me. Or it was bait. Both felt possible. My breath trembled against the mic as I logged it. Entry 5. Reverse audio reveals structured coordinates. Linked to abandoned station. I played it one more time before closing the recorder. As the hiss unraveled backward, it thickened into something worse. Not just numbers now. A voice pulled long through cloth, whispering a phrase over and over. Water and sleep. It turned my mouth dry, my skin raw with heat. That night I dreamed rain inside the house. Pouring through light fixtures, spilling downstairs, filling my lungs as I woke choking. My pillow damp with spit I thought was water. When I reached for the recorder at dawn, I found something that shattered me. A new file existed on the device. I had not pressed record. The label read simply, 3:19 a.m., and inside it my dream, captured in full. My gasping. The rushing sound of drowning in rainfall. My voice struggling as though someone stood at the head of the bed with a microphone. I dropped the recorder like it burned. My hands shook so badly I couldn't pick it up again immediately. But I forced myself. I couldn't deny what was there. I saved it to tape, wrote it in my log by hand. Because memory will lie. Recordings won't. The escalation was plain. The sound wasn't content to hide in background files anymore. It was here, crossing over. Reaching past tape into sleep, rewriting what reality even meant to hold. I whispered into the new entry, voice hollow. If I go there, it may change me. But the sound is already calling. The drive out to Cold Hill was longer than I remembered. Roads narrowed to cracked asphalt, weeds splitting the lines. No cars passed. My recorder sat in the passenger seat, red light blinking, logging every mile. I told myself that my voice on tape would be proof if I didn't make it back. The coordinates fell against a ridge cut with rusting towers. When I stepped out, the air smelled of iron and rot. The station loomed at the edge of a field. Corrugated steel folded against itself, roof pocked with holes. Doors hung crooked. The antenna mast bent like a snapped spine against the sky. Inside, the silence didn't feel empty. The floor creaked damp beneath my boots. A trail of moss split through cracked tile. I raised the recorder. My breath echoed tenfold. Then it came the low hiss of a console, faint but alive. The boards still clung to power despite being decades dormant. Dials twisted slightly on their own, glowing weak and green. Static rolled out from the speaker hidden in the console face. It staggered, then cracked into a long distorted burst that almost tore my microphone apart. I jerked back. The room shuddered under the sound, a spectrum bloom that bent the air in waves. My ears rang hot with pressure dug when it calmed. I leaned in. Labels on racks stood faded, but I read them anyway. Each tape sat sealed with brittle stickers, numbers stamped in black ink. At the bottom, one box carried a name: Somnus Program. My skin went cold reading it. I'd filed FOIA slips before on a hunch of that word, always denied. Now the evidence was here, stacked in dust. I slid one tape free, hands shaking. The spools inside were intact, labels dated 1979. I brushed the paper sleeve, my throat dry. They weren't accidents. The government had experimented with sleep broadcasts decades earlier. Rain and static seeded with intrusion. They called it research, but here the notes told another story. Not studies, trials. One folder remained. Inside it, a typed log, volunteer responses. Marks along columns of hours listened, paired with notes like suggestibility heightened, recall pliable, subject compliant. Each entry strained fear into me. People had heard this before. Some were erased after, I was sure of it. I whispered into the recorder, voice tight with disbelief. This wasn't science. It wasn't therapy. It was a doorway. Then a sound I didn't expect. From the console came another whir. A second tape played quietly, as if it had never stopped. Reels turning slow, the same speckled hiss filling the whole room. My heart seized. Outside, rainfall thickened against the steel walls, though the sky had been clear when I arrived. The console trembled faintly, humming through the floor. I leaned closer with the recorder. My voice trembled. A second tape is still running. The reels turned with a slow patience, as if they had been running since the station was sealed. I crouched near the console, every muscle tight, recorder pressed close. The hiss on the tape wasn't uniform. Patterns rose like faint voices beneath the rain. At first I thought it was distortion, but then I caught words. Please, breathless confession seeping through like leaks in plaster. I pressed my ear close to the speaker. The sound carried a rhythm, voices stacked under rain. Snatches of numbers, coordinates, a line that almost formed a sentence. We were told to sleep. Then another fragment, strangled, adjust frequency. My stomach hollowed listening to it. This wasn't empty weather. These were people, captured, trapped in loop. I tried to stop it. My hand hovered at the switch. When I pressed down, the room resisted. The power surged, lights snapping awake in the ceiling one by one. Bulbs that hadn't glowed in decades flickered white, then hummed steady. The tape only turned faster. The speaker spat sudden noise so violent, my recorder cut into static. My headphones fried with a sharp crack. Underneath the roar was something worse. A near-human chant, low and circular, voices locked in feedback with themselves. I dropped to my knees, covering my head as if that would keep it out. My ears throbbed, and still I heard them. When I looked again at the reels, they were spinning backward. No hand touched them. The tape reversed itself, crawling the ribbon towards spools that should have long stiffened with age. Backwards, but crisp. Clearer now than forward. A voice rose above the others, calling coordinates different from before. My pen slipped as I tried to catch them. Part of me wondered if I was recording evidence or writing my own hypnosis. The console rattled. One of the panels loosened and fell, clattering across the floor. Inside, wires still pulsed faintly as if alive. The hum joined itself to the metal frame, whole room buzzing as if it wanted me to kneel closer. I leaned in even though every part of me screamed no. And then, something cut sharp. One voice emerged, above the chorus, louder, so intimate I thought it whispered into my own ear. A weeping string of words, repeating, begging, "Stop, stop." It wasn't warning me about the signal. It was the signal itself, crying in loops. I panicked. Slapped the switch again. Nothing died. I hit the plug, yanking wires loose with both hands. Sparks bit through my palms. Still the reels turned. Still playback hissed and wept out. I grabbed the tape, wrenched it loose, and pocketed it in shaking hands. I shut my recorder fast, holding it like a shield. I told myself I'd examine it later, when I wasn't inside this tomb where sound built its own gravity. Rain pounded the metal roof above, though the sky had been clear moments before. As I staggered toward the door, the hollow space followed me. Echoes clung close. My own footsteps doubled back like someone else walked in rhythm behind me. I reached the open air, sucking shallow breaths of silence. But when I dared listen close, I swore I still heard it, repeating. Threads of sound stitched over mine. My voice broke as I whispered to the recorder. Or was it echoing me? Back home I couldn't sleep. I laid the tape on my desk, but just having it there felt dangerous. My skin prickled every time my eyes touched it. I told myself I wouldn't play it. Not tonight. Not with what had already torn through my ears at the station. But my brain had other plans. When I did close my eyes, I dreamed. Not shallow images, but sharp sequences, alive and pressing. A room filled with dripping water. My siblings standing in the corner, face turned away, whispering into the rain. I begged them to look at me. They didn't. The whisper grew louder until it didn't sound like them anymore. I woke gasping. My recorder light was on, though I hadn't touched it. A log shimmered on its screen, stamped at 3:12 a.m. I hit play with shaking fingers. It captured more than my breathing, more than sheets moving. It caught the whisper from my dream. Not my sibling's voice exactly, but it echoed the things only they and I had ever said in private. Phrases no one else could know. My throat closed. I sat with the recorder pressed to my chest. This wasn't just intrusion. It was manipulation. My memory was no longer mine alone. My recordings were rewriting themselves into my grief. I checked the tape from the station, forcing myself to load it carefully. As soon as it spun, the hum surged around me. Louder, purer. It didn't throb so much as breathe. I gritted my teeth and tracked the waveform on screen. Every 30 seconds, it shifted into perfect symmetry, then fractured again. A heart trying to match my own, the words bled out again. This time clearer. Not stop, not enter, but a fractured line. We will match. I flinched. It could have been in English only because my mind bent toward meaning. Maybe all translation was the listener's fault. But I heard it, steady, shaping itself to me. That night the dreams bled more vivid. No water this time. Just the hum everywhere, vibrating through walls and desk and skin. In the dream, my recorder sat on the dresser, red light blinking the same way it had in real life. When I woke, it was already rolling. I logged the entry, voice unsteady, words spilling flat on tape. Memory gets rewritten when played too often. It starts sounding more like my own thoughts, less like an intrusion. That's how it opens. Then something warped as I spoke. Playback shifted before my sentences were even done. My voice overlapped my own, one track slightly behind the other, like two versions of me speaking at once, but not aligned. I froze hearing it live. On the recorder, there were already two of me, bent out of sync, both whispering the same spill of fear. I shut the device down fast, my chest hammering. The silence after was worse. And then through the stillness, I heard it again, faint from the tape on the desk. My own voice, doubled and wrong, still speaking. I filed the request like I always do. Plain language, formal box checked, statute cited by number. FOIA freedom of information. I asked for one thing only, documents related to Program Somnus. I mailed it late, slipped it through the slot at the branch post office that still kept red boxes. Weeks later, a thin envelope arrived. Torn edges. Inside, a photocopy pack, each page stained into grayscale smudges. Stamped with the word, released in part, which meant not really. Most of what came back was crossed over with black rectangles thick as tar. The sections left bare didn't say much. Numbers, dates, all written in manual type. I laid the pages flat across the desk. Paper smelled faint of toner, ink greasy when rubbed too hard. What scared me wasn't the silence in the pages. It was what slipped through by mistake. One corner carried a faint watermark, almost gone, as if pressed shallow when the copy rolled through. I tilted it under the table lamp and saw it. A sine wave trace aligned against a classified stamp. A hidden wave printed into the frame. Someone wanted that forgotten. More pages spoken fragments. Subject exposed for 4 hours, measurable effect. Volunteers replaced after cycle 3. A note scrawled in margin. Handwriting unlike the rest. Memory retrieval possible once door induced. Another word. Caught and erased but legible on one slip. Somnus Network. I sat staring at those lines, mouth dry. This was a project bigger than one station. The documents hinted at multiple locations, coordinators, even a timeline sprawling, years longer than the early 80s. I laid a ruler against one of the sheets, trying to find truth in the layout. Along the seam of a black bar, a number string had been missed. Blurred but visible. 44.1. I knew that number. It's the standard sample rate for audio recordings. 44.1 kilohertz. The speed at which the world digitizes sound. They left it in the margin by accident. I clicked my recorder on. My throat tight. Entry 9. FOIA request returned. Data redacted. References to Somnus across multiple nodes, multiple continents. Evidence suggests audio stitched across ordinary use. That was when the line burst. My device caught interference sharp enough to break my sentence. The hum erupted, broke wide into static boil, thrashing against every speaker in the room. It bloomed in midair, no source visible, flaring like invisible lightning. I covered my ears, but the vibration crawled behind my hands. When it cleared, the pages lay heavy. My eyes locked on one note present in faint pen. Entry not permitted once awake. I closed my eyes, voice raw, as I leaned into the recorder. If sleep is a door, I whispered, who controls what comes in? The hum followed me home this time. Not inside tapes or loops or faint distortions from the web. No, it lived in the walls. At first I thought it was plumbing. A loose pipe knocking in the crawl space. But when I pressed my ear to the plaster, the surface trembled against my cheek. My bones rattled. Water doesn't do that. I switched off every breaker in the apartment. Power dead, fridge silent, lamps dark. Still, the walls breathed on, humming low, steady as a buried generator. I kept my notebook open by flashlight, recording observations. My handwriting shook, lines not quite straight. Then the signals began showing up in stranger places. I scanned networks on a laptop still running battery. The normal Bowie Fay names echoed, neighbor routers, hotspots. But mixed through, ghost networks appeared. SEDs named in fixed sequence. Strings of numbers. 5 digits. Then 6. Each one exactly the length of time I had listened to the rain files before. Took screenshots until the machine itself crashed. The cursor jerking slow, like it was resisting my proof. I told myself not to connect. But temptation thickened. The logs repeated in my head, the hidden word door, the coordinates. How many signals did it take before the door itself widened? I set up my shortwave. Old rig, tuned dial rough with wear. The antenna wire stretched out my window, catching night air. For 10 minutes there was only static and thin scratches. Then the line spiked. Solid wave. I turned the gain up. At once the air in my room thickened. My bookshelf rattled as if from deep bass, though the speakers were barely whispering. I couldn't tell if the sound was in my ears or outside of them. The walls pulsed. Vibrations like breaths. I pulled the plug, panicked. The rig went dead. But the air did not. A Doppler shift swelled through the room, rising past human pitch. Objects quivered on my desk. My recorder toppled sideways and still captured the tremor. I bent near, voice shaking as I logged it. Entry 10. Interference dislocated from device. Signal spreads as room-wide resonance. No need for wires anymore. My ears rang in silence that wasn't silence at all. It was waiting. Every wall murmured, each like lungs filled under strain. I closed my eyes, shaking, whispering all I could allow myself to say out loud. It doesn't need wires anymore. The first message came through a burner inbox. No name, no subject line. Only a single sentence. Stop before you are written into it. I read it 3 times before I noticed the attachment. A sound file, 30 seconds long. I played it on loop, straining. The file began with rain. Ordinary soft. But in the middle someone speaking. Their voice filtered, bent, almost genderless. The tone altered to the edge of machine. You're not alone, it said. Then a slow scrape of distortion before silence. The second file arrived the next night. This one harsher, filled with clipped syllables cut by static. The same voice. We built Somnus. It wasn't treatment. It wasn't therapy. Then a violent pop cracked the headphones, loud enough to sting. The message cut to hiss. I opened my recorder, trying to log before memory blurred. My words cracked in the dark. Contact received. Informant inside. Somnus weaponized. Sleep altered for compliance. My hand shook writing notes to back it. I couldn't tell which was more terrifying, that they were confirming my doubts, or that they knew exactly what files I had been gathering. Later, they called. Not from any traceable number. The line filled with distortion and heavy clicks. Then the same masked voice, bent low and iron flat. They told me Somnus targeted vulnerabilities. That sleep itself was the channel. Dreams became maps. Maps could be reshaped. I asked why me? Why reach out? The voice hesitated, then said the words that broke me open. Because you're already logged. The phrase burned. Logged, not observed. Not watched. Logged, like a file written into a system. My body was already indexed. The line erupted, an electrical pop after that. My recorder caught none of their final words, just rattling hum that swelled until it collapsed into flat zero. Silence. I spoke to the dead tape, urgent, shaking. Tell me more. Tell me everything. Don't stop now. But there was nothing. Only noise. The stillness stretched long enough that my heartbeat filled the room. Then 3 sharp knocks at the door, captured clean by the recorder. Steady, deliberate, human. I didn't open the door that night. I sat in the dark with the recorder running, spine pressed against the wall, holding my breath until the knocks stopped. By the time morning light bled through the blinds, I almost convinced myself it had been stress. A vivid hallucination, almost, but the next evening proved worse. I woke to something wrong in the room. The hum was no longer faint. It was surrounding me, thrumming through the window glass. I pushed the curtain aside and froze. There was no storm. No clouds gathered. And yet rain was falling. Thin sheets that glittered under street lamps, though the sky above was clear. Glass of water on my desk rippled shallow from the vibration. I whispered into the recorder, words scraping. Entry 12. Unnatural precipitation. No source in sky. My hand shook so badly the mic bumped against my chin. I went outside. Every instinct screamed not to, but the urge to witness trampled all else. The moment I stepped off the porch, the sound shifted. It wasn't simple rainfall. A spectrum sweep washed across the neighborhood, rolling through me like heat lightning. Electricity without light. Then I saw them. People from every house moving into the street. Pajamas, slippers, bare feet on cold asphalt. Their eyes closed. Their mouths moving in half whispers, each one muttering fragments I couldn't quite catch. I lifted my recorder close and walked among them. They weren't speaking conversations. Each repeated fragments of the same message. Phrases I knew from the station tapes. Open, water and sleep, through the door. Over and over, voices braiding into one another. The worst part wasn't the words but the calm. No panic, no awareness. Every face slack, bodies turning in unison as if following some unseen current. Sleepwalkers drawn together by a hum no one else admitted to. I wedged myself against the light pole, heart clattering, documenting everything. My breath quick on tape. Population affected. Not dreaming individually. Merged into one loop. Signal wide, expanding. At the edge of the crowd I felt it. My knees softened, pulled down by the rhythm. My head leaned in the same direction theirs tilted. Part of me wanted to surrender. To close my eyes and follow the tide. Anything to stop feeling so alone in this. I pressed the recorder hard against my chest, forcing my lungs to move. I nearly joined, I whispered, words cracked raw. It wanted me inside it. It wants me inside it. The bodies shuffled closer together, a tide murmuring under clear skies and impossible rain. And in that suffocating calm, I admitted to the tape the truth that scared me more than any of it. I wanted to follow. I don't trust my memory anymore. That isn't paranoia. It is fact. I know because the tapes prove it. I've found logs I don't remember recording, my voice saying things I've never thought. One file labeled with yesterday's date begins mid-sentence. I listen, heart racing, as my own voice whispers coordinates, long strings of numbers anchored by the word door. I don't recall ever speaking them. Another tape begins with me arguing. Same voice, same tone, but doubled. One is mine. The other is also mine, only a half step out of rhythm. They debate whether to keep listening. They laugh at each other. Hearing myself against myself chills me deeper than any interference ever has. I sit in the dark, playing them back. I whisper into the live recorder, entry 13. Recordings no longer align with memory. Inconsistencies exist between log and recall. My hand shakes as I try to force myself to stay calm. The evidence is clear. The recordings are intrusions, spilling over into what I mistake for memory. When I stop playback, I catch the afterglow in my head. Lines I shouldn't know echo like deja vu. I jot them into the notebook, ink jagged on the page. Then I wonder, are these real recollections or only bleed through from listening too often? Someone once said signals become doors. Doors work both ways. When they pry into me, they leave themselves behind. Later, I fall asleep in my chair. I wake to find the recorder already running. It's captured me talking in my sleep. I listen, horrified, as I hear myself confiding to no one. Apologizing for things long buried. Apologies I never said out loud, not even to my sibling before they were gone. The tape steals private ghosts, feeding me back grief in a language shaped like forgiveness. I scream at it. I throw the recorder against the wall. But when I pick it up, the red light still blinks, still logging, still hungry. I slap the switch, but the file continues. It doesn't shut off. I scroll frantically and watch new minutes press onto the counter. Even as the device sits dead in my hands, not in panic, I play it back. What I hear makes my chest seize. Dozens of my voices in overlapping tracks. Some murmurs, some pleading, some laughing. The room swells with me upon me until I can't see myself as one anymore. I cry into the mic, desperate. Which one is me now? The echoes answer all at once. My own voice, hundreds of them, speaking back my question until the air splits. I slammed the recorder shut. I drove back to the station with a single purpose. I told myself I would end it. If the console was the doorway, I had to break the frame. The towers stood bent and rotting as before, the field wet with autumn rain. My boots sank mud as I forced the corroded door open and stepped inside again. The boards still hummed like they hadn't been touched since my last visit. Red dust settled thick over the consoles, mold across the counters. The tapes were gone from the racks, all but the one still running, as if someone had already taken the archive. My gut sank. I wasn't the only one here in years past. I yanked the recorder from my bag and set it down. My voice caught against the hiss spilling from the cabinets. Entry 14. Return to station. Intention. Terminate signal. My hands shook as I unspooled a length of cable, ready to slice. I tore through the first panel with a crowbar. Rust snapped metal apart easy. I smashed through brass dials, glass shattering under fists. Sparks spat across the room. I pulled wires bare, ripped them from sockets. The hiss ripped higher as I did, like the system screaming every time I cut at its body. But even as the machinery fell in on itself, the hum didn't fade. The power only throbbed deeper. My recorder caught distortion so heavy, it nearly fried the track. A bloom of noise erupted that bent the air sideways, forcing me onto one knee. It wasn't trapped in any coil of copper. It was outside, soaking the structure itself. I stumbled toward the main console. It sputtered sparks, panels glowing red before burning through. I smashed until the whole surface flamed. Acrid smoke curled against my eyes. I staggered back. Flames chewed their way out of the wires, boards crumbling. But the hum held steady, pressing in even clearer than before. I lifted the recorder, coughing through fire haze. Destruction failed. Signal persisting. Source not confined. My stomach hollowed as I spoke the truth. It doesn't live in the console. It migrates. It's inside the recordings themselves. The roof shuddered, metal groan echoing in the blaze. Rain slammed harder outside than on any night before. Yet inside the recorder caught more rain than fell from the sky. Impossible weight, hammering inside the tape itself. As if the storm now nested inside whatever I touched. I bolted for the door as the station caught light behind me. Ash smeared my sleeves, smoke burning my lungs raw. My chest collapsed as I gasped again into the device, desperate to mark the moment. The signal doesn't need machines anymore. My throat cracked on the words. It needs us. The city was already sick with it when I arrived. I could hear it bleeding from windows before I even saw the first faces. Blocks of apartments pulsed with the same faint hiss, like every room inside was tuned to a shared station. I walked streets empty of traffic where engines sat running, headlights pointed nowhere. Their drivers slumped against wheels, Lips moving in whispers I couldn't hear. I turned corners and saw office buildings with lights burning at 3 in the morning. Whole floors of workers asleep at desks, heads bowed like in prayer. Coffee spilled across keyboards. Long spreadsheets stretched across monitors, the same phrase filling every cell. I pressed my recorder to glass. The word repeating wasn't random. It was door. On the bus route, vehicles stood stalled, passengers slumped in seats, sway uniform. Each mouth shifting in time. When I climbed the steps, I saw an old woman rocking, a boy pressing palms to his ears, and a dozen others leaned against the glass. They spoke in rhythm with the engine's idle hum, as though every piston struck syllables into their lungs. I whispered into the mic, fighting panic. Entry 15. Mass exposure evident. Signals transmitted through public systems. Subjects compromised mid-function. My breath shook harder, heartbeat drilling fast in my throat. Then I walked into the square. 100 people at least, maybe more. All standing still under the drizzle that wasn't supposed to fall that night. They tilted their heads upward, mouths open, letting rain pour down throats. None of them coughing, none resisting. Only breathing the same slow cycle. Sudden static erupted sharp, invisible. The crowd jerked once. Then, all of them inhaled at the exact same time. A sound like bellows. A single drawn breath amplified by hundreds of lungs. My recorder clipped instantly, distortion splitting my skull. I crumpled against a lamp post, ears searing dot when they exhaled. It was softer, but somehow heavier. The breath carried with it the same murmur from tapes, words I had cataloged hidden under static. Water and sleep. Through the door. I staggered into the center like a drunk, raising the device even though part of me wanted to smash it flat before it captured any more. My voice cracked as I left the log. Entire crowd synchronized, breathing in interference rhythm. Signal strong enough now to shape cities. And still I couldn't leave. My knees threatened to buckle, to let me fall safely into place among them. Because in that moment, seeing their calm, hearing their perfect unity, I felt a terrible flush of envy. The longer I stayed in the city, the more it hollowed me out. My body was breaking down. Every morning I woke with blood on the pillow, thin smears from the nosebleeds that had become constant. My ears rang in silence. My head throbbed like the hum had rooted deep inside. There were hours I couldn't account for. Blank spaces. I'd find notes scratched in my own handwriting, phrases I didn't remember writing. Prepare, match cadence, you are included. I forced myself to document it, but voice logs blurred. My sentences drifted. I pressed play on an entry from the night before and listened as I spoke slowly, calmly, about things I had no memory of saying. Dates that hadn't happened yet. Directions to streets I had never walked. Then the message came from my ally. Encrypted file. No subject. The size alone urged caution, but I opened it anyway. The video was grainy, distorted by compression tiers, but what I saw cut through the static. Volunteers lined in rows beside a console like the one at Cold Hill. Headsets strapped across faces. Their bodies rigid at first. Then each convulsed in sequence as if synchronized seizures. Audio stress tests, they called it. Exposure attempts. Broadcast entry. One by one the bodies dropped slack, mouths open, pulses flat. I paused the frame. In the corner was a handwritten note taped to the console. Entrants do not return intact. I tried to call the ally back. No response. Number disconnected. I sent fresh messages and they bounced like the mailbox had been erased. I knew then what their warning had cost. They had been swallowed after sending me this fragment. Institutional silence in real time, enacted on a person breathing only minutes before. I sat with the recorder, palms trembling as I confessed. Entry 16. Informant erased. Files confirm exposure fatal in most attempts. Signal not just intrusion. It is inhabitance. Elastic strength. It pours itself into subjects until flesh breaks trying to contain it. My voice broke, and I am already saturated. The hum had changed in recent days. Quieter, closer, riding the line of my pulse. I placed my hand against my chest and felt it. Beat for beat, the rhythm lined itself to me. Tonight when I whispered into the mic, my whispers overlapped without playback. Real-time doubling. My own voice already leaking into parallel tracks. I shut my eyes and said the words I didn't want to know. I don't know if these are mine anymore. If the tape belongs to me, or if I belong to it. The silence after sounded like breathing. Not mine. I couldn't stay inside any longer. The walls shook with my own pulse. The signal had followed me through plaster, through breath, through blood. So I climbed. North of the river, there was a tower, one of the old FM skeletons still standing. I parked beneath it, recorder strapped tight to my chest. I told myself if the signal wanted me, then I would meet it where it lived. Wind clawed at me as I climbed each rung. Rust bit into my palms, flakes raining below. The city stretched far under me, silent except for the rain. By the halfway mark, my body wanted to give up, lungs tearing, arms burning. But the hum only grew cleaner the higher I went. Static peeled away. Sharp tones rang clear. I made myself log. Entry 17. Signal purity increases with altitude. Layered transmissions evident. My voice dragged in gasps at the top. I hooked my arm through the safety rail and pressed the recorder against the sky. The pitch rolled open, melting into tones so alien they almost felt delicate. 3 distinct layers, harmonics folding. They didn't sound like voices, but something in me recognized them as speech. Languages none of us had ever written, but layered like memory wedged into bone. Lightning bloomed distant over the ridge. Not storm lightning, but a spectrum flare that lit the metal tower like silver. Sparks spat from the headset pressed against my ear. Heat licked down the wire into my skin. My teeth clenched against the shock, and then clarity. For the first and only moment. As if everything before had been prelude. The voice that spoke wasn't alien. It was familiar. It said my name. I froze. My sibling's voice. Perfect. Whole. Impossible. Pulling from rain the shape of the person I had lost. Years gone, yet now alive in the broadcast, threaded into storm. Come with me, it said. Simple as memory. The rails held cold against my clenched fists. My chest folded inward with sobs before I knew. I begged into the mic, words breaking. If this is real, then what died in them? What did I bury? The hum answered with another flare that split the line. The tapes fluttered raw in my pocket, and the tower itself buzzed as if speaking back through my bones. Then silence ate the signal clean. When the signal went quiet, I thought maybe I had broken it. But silence wasn't relief. It was worse. It carried the weight of something withdrawn, only to gather strength again. By the time I climbed down from the tower, the city was no longer the city I knew. Streetlights flickered dim against the rain. Cars sat frozen with drivers unmoving, hands still on wheels. Pedestrians stood in groups, paused like statues mid-step, faces damp, mouths parted. For a second I thought they were mannequins. But then I heard it, the murmur. Dozens, hundreds, all whispering sleep-thick phrases in unison, as if it were a hymn. When I walked through them, the sound followed. Water and sleep. Through the door. Match the breath. I turned my recorder outward, documenting at every step. My voice cracked into the log. Entry 18. Collapse evident. Population entrained. Effect resembles full dislocation from awareness. The closer I moved into the city's center, the more distorted reality itself seemed to bend. Buildings leaned in ways my eyes strained to correct. Neon signs stretched into echoes, words elongated until unreadable. The air pulsed with a harmonic rising past hearing, but the tape caught it clearly. The waveform bent upward until the recording clipped again and again, past a taxi with its engine off but meter still running. Every number on the display ticked downward instead of up. A man leaned against the hood, eyes closed, mouth whispering fragments I could barely parse. When I stopped to record, he whispered my name through the static of his breath. My chest locked. I staggered sideways into a storefront window, palms braced against glass quivering like water. The entire block shivered at once. A harmonic so strong that concrete itself seemed to ripple. My microphone nearly failed. The spectrum bloom broke the counter, a seizure of jagged lines across the track. I forced myself to whisper. Buildings bending. Signals transfiguring matter. Collapse field in process. My lungs burned, every breath harder to catch in the tide of unified rhythm filling the city. I turned a corner and saw the skyline glitch. Whole towers shimmered side to side, their shapes doubled, edges sliding against each other like overexposed film. The crowd below froze again, all at once, locked mid-inhale. The hush pulled so heavy it prickled tears in my eyes. The harmonic rose sharper and sharper until I pressed my hands against my ears, recorder rattling in their grip. The city swayed without wind. The people spoke without choice. Memory and recording fused into one endless log. I gasped my words into the machine, desperate, terrified. If this is collapse, who is awake to remember? I knew the collapse wouldn't stop. It wasn't going to resolve on its own. Every breath I took now matched its rhythm, and when I replayed old logs, my voice already bent to its cadence. The city swam in static light. People were reduced to transmitters. I couldn't pretend I was different, but maybe I could try to jam it. Not stop it, but cut across it long enough to leave a scar. I scavenged equipment through the night. A mixer from a half-looted studio. A battered amplifier someone had abandoned in a stairwell. Coax cable wound in coils. I wired it all together in my apartment with hands trembling so hard I almost tied the wrong ends. My plan was simple, more ritual than science. Record my own voice raw. Feed it through layers of feedback. Blast it into the wave until one of us broke. I set the recorder down, trembling as always, but steadier in resolve. Entry 19, I began. Exit attempt. Strategy, noise injection, self-voice feedback. If it fails, this will be the final. My words wavered, then steadied. Transmission. I drew in a breath and spoke into the mic. Not facts, not notes, but everything I feared. I told it I didn't want to be a vessel, that it had already taken too much, that my sibling was not a ghost to barter, that grief belonged to me, not to Rain. My throat scalded. My words shook the table. I looped the track back into itself. The sound doubled, then trebled, then spiraled upward into shrieking feedback as I twisted the amp. The room slicked with distortion. The walls bent like paper under pressure. The speakers hissed fire. The hum fought back. It swallowed my loops, warping them until they weren't defiance anymore. Hearing my own voice shredded and folded until it sounded like prayer was almost worse than silence. The spectrum bloom flared so strong the canned lights overhead blew. Darkness filled with violet afterimage. I leaned forward, pressed my mouth against the mic, roaring against static. If my voice breaks, so be it. Let the fracture take you too. But I didn't recognize the sound. My tone stretched, tore, bled into echoes not my own. The entire rig quaked. My notes slid off the desk. Paper caught the air like wings. Electricity flared out of the sockets. And even inside the noise, I felt something pulling, dragging, forcing me toward the other side of the broadcast. My words kicking free like sparks, the recorder spit and warped. My last clear breath hit the log. I might not make it through the other side. When the system finally burned quiet, I thought I was gone too. The feedback swallowed everything, even the sound of my own breath, and then it all dropped into a silence so heavy it felt permanent. I woke hours later, slumped over the desk, body stiff, throat raw, cables scorched black. My mouth tasted of blood, iron, and smoke. At first I heard nothing. No hum, no static. Just the thin buzz of daylight through the blinds. I thought I'd killed it. Maybe even escaped. But when I pressed play on the recorder, the voice that spoke back wasn't mine, at least not the way it should be. It was too calm, too measured, detached, like someone performing the memory of me. The words layered slow. End of session. Cycle complete. Transmission remains. I hadn't said that. Not in any log. I leaned closer, staring at my own red light. I whispered, "If this is still running, who's speaking?" I checked every file. None matched what I remembered. What I had actually lived was different from what was on tape. Logs were bent, cut into new shapes. Sentences replaced with phrases that didn't belong. The door isn't closed. It never closes. Feed it forward. Those weren't my words. But they sounded like me. I sat back, body trembling. My grief cracked open. If the recorder could rewrite the past, it could overwrite anything. Memory isn't proof anymore. Recording isn't proof. One lies like the other. And yet I couldn't stop pressing play. The rain began faint outside. Then faint inside the speaker. Two storms layered until I couldn't separate them. I realized there was no silence left. Only rain beneath everything, permanent and steady. I leaned into the mic with one last confession. My voice sounded far away, unmoored. The purpose was never to close the door. It was to leave something behind, for someone else to find. And then the playback twisted. The tape bled with words I hadn't spoken. Playback is also participation. The voice lingered, too patient. Now it is in you.